The complicated, and I'm juxtaposing complicated with complex. Complex is like a bird. Complicated is like remote control airplane. The complicated things like confessions of faith, systems of theology, tries to pre-specify relevance, and it cannot, since it cannot attain to the complex. Relevance realization is constantly, and you say, what do you mean? Over here, on this side of the line, is the complex. Over here is the complicated. These, back to the videos, we've already done videos on this. We have complicated over here, and this is the nest before you get kicked out of the nest so you can fly. Over here, it's complex over here. Over here, it's complicated. And when it comes time to get booted out of the nest, maybe some of this stuff, and what we've talked about also before in our previous videos is when the time comes for you to transition into stage 4 and 5, Christianity should be built in such a way to where it intentionally graduates you from the pediatric stages of itself toward the more mature stages of itself, the more adolescent adult, and eventually geriatric versions of itself is what should be happening. So the problem is, you'll notice that through line here should stop when you're ready to go into second half of life wisdom, and the church should be facilitating your graduation into second half of life wisdom. But what happens is that line keeps going, and you think that this complicated version of Christianity that you got is supposed to be the thing you carry with you till you die. With that in mind, that's a huge problem. And what happens there, as we talked about before, so another way to say, if you've seen our video on Mammon Church, even though provisionism isn't as awful as Calvinism, it's still stage 3, okay? So if we look at the stages of growth, provisionism is still happening down here. Even though it's not Calvinism, it's still happening down here. And the fact that it defines itself in the negative space of something that is not Calvinism, which is also stage 3, frightens me a lot really, that it sets people up to never leave stage 3, because they're defining success by not being Calvinist rather than by growing. There are some people, for example, Marshall Davis used to be a Calvinist. He's not anymore. He has gone on. He's experienced unitive awareness, that kind of thing. And sometimes, like Calvinism, provisionism, they're both stage 3 things. And if people go through either one on their own, that's fine. But that rivalry between them can get somebody locked into a rivalrous mode, a combative mode, rather than an explorative and growth mode. And they won't learn the lessons that come from the trials in their life, and they will stay in stage 3 for the rest of their life, and they will die there. That's one of the problems. So Calvinism, provisionism, they're both operating there. They're both stage 3 areas. When you go from Calvinism to provisionism, you have not gone up to stage 4 or 5. You have made a lateral move over to stage 3, but you may have done so in such a way that forces you to be combative in the future against another stage 3 thing, which keeps you at stage 3 for the rest of your life. That's a big problem, and we need to figure out how to remediate that problem. But according to the Mammon Church video that we did, even though provisionism is better than Calvinism in some ways, it corrects a couple of propositions, a few propositions, it is still Mammon Church, and it's still a problem. And so when we go back to our diagram, it is still the kind of thing that only permits growth up to here, and it's like there's a stop sign. We do not allow growth up beyond this stop sign. There's a problem with that too. When you don't allow growth beyond the stop sign, something happens here. You get like a little estuary. See this little blue thing here? When you only have a version of Christianity that cannot get that treats stage 3 like it is the lifelong version of Christianity, and there's no way to graduate, does not facilitate growing out of stage 3, not only do you cause all these problems, it's stifling and abortive, there's no allowance or affordance or anticipation for enhanced perspective, further transformation, but it also does something else. Whenever growth is ideologically stultified, there's always a bubble of some kind of corruption or significant ineptitude right there that always like festers right around the top of this thing, where there should be a waterfall of people being launched out of the nest right here. But no, they're being retained, and then there's corruption and ineptitude, and only corruption and ineptitude can happen there. Gothard, Hiles, Scop, I think is how they pronounce his name, Phelps, Westboro Baptist, Carl Lentz, Brian Houston from Hillsong. If you do a look, after major investigation, Southern Baptists confront the abuse crisis they knew was coming. 380 allegations spanning 20 states and an unprecedented look at sexual misconduct across the denomination. A landmark investigation into hundreds of cases of sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist churches opened with a collage of pictures of the offenders, row after row of headshots and mugshots of men who had been accused of abusing a total of 700 victims over the past 20 years. Do a quick Google search. Come up with scandals in the church. John MacArthur defending a pedophile and calling out the wife from the pulpit as if she's the problem, using ghostwriters, praising slavery. These are things he was in the news for recently. You may disagree with some of these, but the point is, these are the scandals. These are the perspectives some people had. The Southern Baptist Apocalypse Sex Report. Victims were called crazy and satanic. Johnny Hunt, who was like restored and put back into the ministry after some serious allegations. Now, I know that an allegation does not equal a conviction. Still troubling. John B. Lowe II confessed to an adulterous relationship which turned out to be rape, prompting rape culture accusations for evangelicals from the media after all this Southern Baptist stuff and all this stuff going on. The Falwell Jr., the pool boy situation that they had. There was a youth pastor in Greer, South Carolina, who created a controversy with an I Love Hot Youth Pastors bumper sticker. Matt Chandler had some DM chats with women that were inappropriate and too personal, and he's restored now. Andy Stanley said something like women pastors are basically spiritual lesbians. That's a crazy thing to say. Now, my mindset, Andy Stanley gets a lot of flack from a lot of people, but I'm curious about him because he seems to exhibit divergent thinking in a few areas, and I want to see where that is. Unexampled thinking. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that intellectual thought is not imitative. So whenever somebody is doing or saying something that they didn't get from somewhere else, I'm interested. I'm interested in Andy Stanley. I don't have anything against him, but I do think that the kind of Christianity that we all follow causes people to say stupid things like this. Stupid thing to say. Rich Mullins' dark seasons of gay. Kanye West, who was known for his anti-Semitism, found a home with evangelicalism with a bunch of John MacArthur students taking him on after he, I guess, Christianized somehow. Top 10 things of 2021, one website came up and mentioned Josh Duggar, caught and convicted child porn. Sins of Brian Houston's father, Brian Houston of Hillsong, not to mention Brian Houston, stuff that he had going on. A divorce, some gay pedophilia, Southern Baptist style, Beth Moore in the SBC, Kristen Kobe's Demunes was called a wolf, and some of these may not be huge issues, but the idea, Ravi Zacharias is a big one, Mark Driscoll, QAnon, Bill Gothard's Sex Factory, and that's kind of what I've watched some of these. I've been around, and these are just the ones that made the news. In my own experience, things that I've been close to, when I was a kid, I was in a church, independent Baptist church, and the pastor was womanizing, sleeping around with a bunch of women. The guy that came after him had something going on that was incestuous. And in the next time I was in an independent Baptist church as an adult, I've done a video, I don't know if it's the next time. The one that I wound up in as an adult that I had also been in as a younger kid, Trinity Baptist Church, we've already done a video on that one on what a narcissist that guy was. Just terrible, absolute spiritual abuse going on at every level. And then you could go through all these, and you could just Google any of these. The Playboy of Liberty University, Josh Harris stuff, and they listed Donald Trump here, and some of y'all may have different feelings about that, but the fact is he's got a lot of sexual scandal stuff going on. A lot of evangelicals are behind him, and you can make with that whatever you want to.
Your content continues right after this. This video is a short segment of a longer one. The full-length video is in the description below. We're moving all content on relationships, growth, and transformation to our new channel called BTF Grow and Relate. Future content in these categories will also be posted there, so subscribe and hit the bell icon to that channel to stay updated. Our website, Beyond the Fundamentals, offers valuable resources including our reading list and glossary to help digest our content. For personalized help, we offer paid one-on-one consultations. Just visit the website, scroll to the consultation section, and fill out the form to book a session. If you find our content valuable, please consider supporting us financially. It takes time and resources to create this content, and donations help make it possible. Supporters also receive an invitation to our weekly FSI group sessions. You can donate via the QR code or visit our donate page on the website, which offers 5 electronic ways to give. If you prefer another method, send me an email for more options. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And now back to the content.
Things that I've been close to, and in the news, everything else. What you see is this cesspool of corruption and ineptitude at the top of a stage 3 system that has nothing to offer beyond that. It's like when people should be jumping out of the nest, they're just circling the wagons of non-growth around the top of the stream. That's the fruit. That's the fruit that's coming. And you say, well, provisionism isn't that bad. Look, it doesn't matter what the propositions are. You see? It doesn't matter what the propositions are. That's the fruit. Being oriented toward propositions is the problem. Now, where were we? Complicated confessions of faith, systems of theology that try to pre-specify relevance. Over here, you're leaving the nest. It's like flight. You can't write a set of rules for the kind of faith where all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient. You never know what's going to be appropriate for the context in which you find yourself, so you can't pre-specify rules for that. And so rules and regulations, it's always humans overestimating their capacity to pre-specify relevance for situations in which we don't know that we're going to find ourselves in. So it's not a good idea to have a religion that's built out of that kind of thing, especially for second half of life wisdom. It tries to pre-specify relevance, and it cannot, since it cannot attain to the complex. Relevance realization is constantly evolving in the individual and in any group. The problem with man-made contracts, text laws, confession statements, dogmas, and systems is that they overestimate our capacity for pre-specifying relevance, and it's something that they just cannot do, including provisionism, not just Calvinism. People have an itch for certainty because it relieves the anxiety that is inherent with uncertainty. So the religious organizations are essentially in competition to see who can scratch that itch with the best and most persuasive explanatory power. We can give you more certainty than they can. And Southern Baptists are really bad about educating their people in theology, and so that they are great targets for the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Calvinists to come along. And the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, they pluck members out of the churches, and the Calvinists come along and do a stealth hostile takeover of them. But either way, they're not prepared, and then they come along. Provisionism is in this game just as much as Calvinism, and it's the wrong game to play. It's not whether you're on one side of the battery or the other one, it's the wrong battery. It's the wrong game to play. Uncertainty is the wisdom gem. Wisdom chips away at the chrysalis, the cocoon you should be coming out of. It doesn't add to it. Provisionism adds to your ego chrysalis, just like Calvinism does. It adds to your ego chrysalis, something you have to break out of. You're going to have to break. If you call yourself a provisionist or a free grace person right now, that is a cocoon that you're going to have to hatch out of if you're ever going to grow into second half of life wisdom. You have to. Orientation towards certainty. Okay, wisdom chips away at the chrysalis. It does not add to it, reshape it, or reinforce it. And when I say wisdom, what I'm saying is that you can't be a provisionist or a Calvinist and grow in wisdom. Provisionism, Calvinism, that's the chrysalis. That's the container. Wisdom gets you out of the container. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. It doesn't add to it. Wisdom doesn't add to the container or your ego. You could say the container is, your ego is partly made out of that. Reshape it, it doesn't add to it or reshape it or reinforce it. Orientation towards certainty is disorientation away from wisdom. It's disorientation away from the sacred, and it constitutes profanity. Proper orientation is toward transformation and toward qualitatively enhanced capability and perspective, think of the Count of Monte Cristo, toward the way that is Christ, not propositional conclusions which only serve to thwart transformation. Yes, provisionism, just like Calvinism, thwarts transformation. Doesn't matter if you think the propositions are better. It doesn't matter at all. Provisionism defines itself in terms of the false doctrine that it finds itself struggling with. These are just some of my notes. I watched a podcast recently of a woman, and I probably have it in my history, and I can tell you what it is, who writes books on UFOs, but she does so agnostically. In other words, she doesn't have any beliefs about the UFOs. She's just compiling the data. And so she, very educated, doctorate degree. She's not a conspiracy theory, not a kook person, nothing like that, nothing crazy like that. She's just gathering all the data from all the historical evidence that she can find, and from current stories, and from evidence that she can find. If somebody says, hey, let's go look at this wreckage, they'll go look at the wreckage. If it's supposed to be flying saucer or something like that, they'll go look at everything. So she's cataloging everything and just gathering the evidence and being aware of the evidence. She's not coming to any conclusions. And so you could come to conclusions. You say, well, these UFOs, you could say they're not real. You could say they're from a different dimension. You could say they're from a humanoid species that's been living in the Mariana Trench on planet Earth since the beginning. We just haven't found them yet. Or you could say that they're demons. You could say anything that you want. You know, they're lizard reptilian and the grays. You could say all this stuff. Some people have strong opinions and beliefs about those kinds of things. She's not doing that. She's just cataloging the data, the evidence, and laying it out there and talking through it. That's all she's doing. It made me think that that would actually be a better kind of Christianity that we should do. We should not make the mistake of thinking that coming to a conclusion is the thing that we should be doing. So why do we think that? Why do we think that one of the things we should be doing as a Christian is coming to a conclusion about the thing that we're supposed to believe about the thing? You don't see anybody in the Bible doing that, but we do that because we got spun off on a tangent probably about 300 AD or so, and we've never recovered from it. We should not be scouring the evidence with preconceived conclusion in mind, or that any conclusion is desirable to be arrived at other than your transformed self. We should be examining the evidence with an extremely fluid disposition toward any conclusions at all. Like maybe we're aware of what the implications are, but I don't have to identify with them. We tend to make the mistake and then we moralize it. Like now you're more moral if you hold these conclusions and you're less moral if you hold these. We make the mistake of thinking that having solid, consistent answers is the job of the institution or of the institutional church. But we need to be beginners. We all need to be beginners and have beginner's mind all the time. As I said, when I go to scripture, for all I know, I could find Calvinism next time I go in there. I'm not pre-concluding that I won't. A provisionist reads the Bible with the preconceived notion of not Calvinism. So even though they're against Calvinism, Calvinism is still living rent-free in their salience landscape all the time. And they're still allowing it to shape how they see the world. We have to get away from that.